I wanted to say a massive thank you for joining me on the channel. I'm honored to have you, and I can't wait to hear all about your career journey, Bill.
Oh, wow, thanks, Chantel. It's fun to be here.
You're making my flowers look very subpar with the Emmys in the background there.
Well, then they've done their job.
Where are the rest of the 25?
29, actually. Most of them are downstairs. 10 of them are shattered in a bag in the garage because we had an earthquake here years ago, and those statues, they shatter like eggs. I've got one in the guest bathroom, and my theory for that, the reason I do that, is because I figure that secretly everybody wants to have their moment of, like, I'd like to thank the Academy, holding the statue. And in the guest bathroom, they can do that because it's private and there's a mirror. So I have one there.
Wow, most people have a nice soap. You've got an Emmy. That's awesome.
Oh, I've got soap also. But
yeah.
No.
That's good to hear. Okay, well, I'd love to get into the questions with you.
Sure.
So you've obviously had an incredibly successful career. I mean, the 29 Emmy Awards are just a testament to that. And it sounds like you've had a very exciting one as well. But what was your start to the entertainment industry like, and how were you able to secure the role of an executive producer?
Well, it started right out of college. In college, I majored in broadcast communications, mostly international and comparative broadcast communications. And I was planning on going to grad school to get at least my master's and probably my PhD in that sort of thing. But between undergrad and grad school, just through a weird set of circumstances and somebody knew somebody who knew somebody, I ended up getting a job at my local television station. I grew up in kind of a relatively small city in Pennsylvania in the United States called Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's where the Amish come from, if you've heard of them. So a relatively small station. And I got a job there as a secretary, basically, mostly answering viewer mail for a TV show that was syndicated around the United States at the time. Then what I did, which is something I would encourage anybody who's just starting out to do. Obviously, you won't do exactly what I did because I was working in TV. You might be working in some other field. But at 5 o'clock, when everybody else went home, I stuck around and I taught myself how to use the editing equipment. I did that for a week. And then the next week, I did the same thing with the camera. So, on my own time, I was learning how to do those things. And then I just waited for somebody to get sick. And eventually somebody did, and we were supposed to be shooting something, just a little, a little minute and a half, little, filler piece. But the person who was going to be producing it and shooting it and editing it, because I said it's a small station, so one person did everything. That person was sick, and I went to the boss. I said, "Hey, John, I think I can probably pull this off. Why don't we give it a shot? If it doesn't work, then you're no worse off than you are now." And he said, "Oh, makes sense." So I produced it, shot it, and edited it, and it worked out great. It was actually really good. So he said, "Oh, we should have you do some more of those." So I did, and then eventually graduated into producing full-length feature stories, which were 6.5 minutes. And those started getting seen across the United States because I said there was this syndicate of 120 stations, and larger markets started to kind of take notice. Like, who's this kid from Lancaster whose stuff keeps appearing? And eventually one of the bigger markets said, they were looking for somebody, and they figured I would work for cheap, and they were right. So I flew across the country to Portland, Oregon, and we can talk about this later. One thing led to another, and then all of a sudden I'm in Seattle producing a comedy show, which I thought would last. I figured I'd be in Seattle maybe 2 years, 3. I mean, none of us, when we started the show, thought it would last more than 5 at the outside. And it lasted 15 years, and we were a hit. We were number 1 in our time slot for 10 straight years without a break, without a single week's break. So, yeah, it worked out. But here's the thing. Because I took advantage of that opportunity to learn new skills, that secretarial job is the only job outside of, when I was a kid, that I ever applied for. Every other job, they came to me. I think that's the key. I'm always amazed, Chantel, when I was, and this is a rambling answer, of course, but when I was the executive producer of my comedy show, I hired interns, of course, unpaid interns. And on the first day, I always told them, I said, "Look, you're working for Almost Live," which was the name of my show, but you're in a TV station in a major market. I mean, Seattle is considered, I think we're the 12th largest market in the United States. And you're in the dominant station, the number 1 station. If at any time during your internship you want to hang out with the news crew, you want to interview the news anchor, you want to see, you want to spend a day with the marketing department. You want to, anything you want to do here, I'll set up for you. Chantel, in 15 years, not a single intern ever took me up on that.
Really?
And these were students who purportedly wanted to work in television. And I was offering them the keys to the kingdom. Not a single one over 15 years ever decided to do that. It's like,
why do you think that is, that people don't take that opportunity to network? And
honestly, I don't know. Or maybe they didn't really have a plan for what they wanted to do and therefore didn't know to take advantage of it. If you don't know what you want, or at least have some idea, then of course you have no idea what pathway to take. And not that there's any right or wrong pathway. You can always change your mind. Any one of those students could have said, you know what, I would like to spend a day hanging out with the assignment editor on the news desk to see how they make those decisions. Maybe that would have led to something, maybe not, but it wouldn't have cost them anything. And they would at least know a little bit more about the business, so that when they're then applying for jobs, they can apply that knowledge to the interview. And that lets them stand apart from the crowd, because most of the people in a job interview do not come with questions. They come ready to answer questions, but they don't come showing that they've done their homework, they've done their research. They actually have some ideas and some thoughts. But at least you're setting yourself up as somebody who thinks about these things. And I promise you, that sets you apart from virtually everybody else who's being interviewed.
Wow, that's such great advice, constantly upskilling. And it sounds like you obviously had such a huge passion for TV, behind the scenes and everything like that. Going on to then the role of the executive producer, I'm not privy to the TV world, so what does that role entail? And for Almost Live, what was your day-to-day like?
Basically, the executive producer is in charge of everything. I'm in charge of hiring people, in charge of firing people. I'm in charge of the budget. I'm in charge of contract negotiations. If it makes it onto the show, it's because I said yes. If it doesn't make it onto the show, it's because I said no. I'm in charge of scheduling. Okay, we're going to take we're going to have reruns this week, and this week. Yeah, basically everything. Now, I'm not the director of the show. The director works for me. The director is, while we're recording the show in front of the live studio audience, I'm down there in the studio doing my back timing and that sort of thing, making sure that the show comes in on time, exactly on time, to the second, every week for 15 years. The director is up in the control room calling, get ready camera 1, take camera 1, stand by 2, take camera 2, bring up this sound effect. So that's what the director's doing.
Right.
But the executive producer is in charge of the overall, of the big picture. Now, that said, it's not a dictatorship. It is kind of. It's a benevolent dictatorship. It's a cooperative dictatorship in that the rest of the team all has a say, but at some point somebody's got to say, okay, here's the decision. Day to day, depending on what the day was, we did both taped field pieces, taped comedy sketches out in the field, which would then be edited together. And then on Saturday evening, we'd get a studio audience and we'd do the show in front of them. If it's a tape piece, we would show that on the monitors, but there were a lot of live elements too, a monologue, live sketches, things like that. So we did the show on Saturday. Basically, that's when we actually got together with the studio audience, and then it aired a few hours later on Saturday night. Saturday morning would be a long day. We get in, I think, around 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. We'd pitch jokes for the monologue. Each of my writers would write about 20 jokes, out of which, and if we had 10 writers, that's 200 jokes.
Wow.
We were all writers. I mean, the cast members and everything. We all wrote for the show. And we picked roughly 8 for the for that section of the show, and then we'd work until 9:30 at night, give or take. 8:30, the audience would come into the station, and then at a certain point, we the intern would take them into the studio, and then do that, and then so Saturday was a long day. We'd take Sunday and Monday off, and then start the whole thing again on Tuesday, and that's what we did for 15 years.
Gosh, the intern sounds like they have a fun job, though. I wish I could have interned at your company.
It was pretty fun. Yeah. It was an interesting opportunity.
And what was it like having a live studio audience?
That was amazing. As soon as the studio audience started coming into the studio, there was an electricity. And we felt it too. I did the audience warm up. There's just such an energy there because it was sold out every single week for 15 years. There were 175 seats, and they were excited. I mean, they'd waited for tickets. Sometimes they'd been trying for weeks or months to get a ticket. Then there they were. They were excited. They wanted to be there. For the first few years, we served wine in the audience lobby until we realized that was a mistake. So sometimes they were not only excited to be there, but that gave us that energy. Because you get so much energy back from the audience when they're laughing, when they're just so appreciative. You go in and it's showtime. Nothing quite like it.
Yeah. And as you said, Almost Live went for 15 years, which is such a long time. I mean, nowadays with platforms like Netflix, they'll churn out so many shows and they last 1 or 2 seasons. How were you able to constantly think of new ideas every single week for 15 years?
Here's one of the things that I learned. One of the big lessons I learned is that when your paycheck depends on you being creative and innovative, you can't afford to wait for inspiration. A lot of people think, well, I'll write when I'm inspired, or I'll take whatever action I need to take when when inspiration strikes. That's when I'll take action, and that's exactly backwards. Action doesn't come from inspiration. Inspiration comes from action. So if we were stuck for an idea, we would just start writing, and we would give ourselves permission to write absolute crap. Just the act of writing, just the act of starting an action, that's where the inspiration comes from, because you'll write something and it's terrible, 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 but all of a sudden something goes like, oh, wait a minute, there's something here in that last terrible idea. Or we'd get together and say, hey, I've got this, what do you think about this? Oh, maybe not, but what if we took it like this and looked at it this way or with this angle? And then there were, tricks and gimmicks that I would use sometimes, like I would get a newspaper. Back in those days, we actually had, actual paper newspapers. And I would look at 2 completely different sections of a news. I would find an article from, the front section and an article from maybe the sports section or the entertainment section. I would force myself to come up with something that ties those 2 stories together. Just forcing your brain to do that kind of forces it to be in a creative space where you see connections. Because that's what humor is. That's also what creativity is. It's the exact same mental process. It's finding connections. It's not waiting for the inspiration, not waiting for the lightning bolt to come down. It's connecting, seeing 2 or more different things and connecting them in a surprising way. And so there are ways to force yourself to do that. Again, read a newspaper article and go like, "Ooh, what if this happened to a dog? What if this happened to an 85-year-old? What if it happened to an 8-year-old? What if," you play a lot of what ifs, and that most of the time led to something. And again, if with anywhere from 8 to 10 of us in any given year writing, the odds are somebody's going to come up with something that the rest of us can kind of sink our teeth into. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure, that makes sense. So it sounds like you had a really wonderfully creative team. So as you said, you were in charge of hiring and firing. So were there particular people or skills or personalities that you were looking for when you were building your team?
First of all, we didn't have the budget to hire writers and performers. So basically, everybody who wrote also performed. Almost all the time, I hired for the writer and then forced them to perform. Great writing can salvage an average performance, but a great performance very rarely can make up for really terrible writing. So, I mean, it all had to start with the writing. At least that was my feeling. And we lasted for 15 years, so something worked. More than that, though, Chantel, I was looking for people with a broad range of interests. I wanted curious people. I wanted people who were interested in all kinds of different things, not just as a group, but as individuals also. Because when it comes to comedy writing, I told you, it's all about making connections.
Yeah.
Well, where do those connections come from? How do you connect those dots? Well, you've got to find those dots in the first place. So I wanted writers who knew a little something about history, who knew a little something about current affairs, who knew a little something about politics, about art, about whatever, about pop culture. Those, you've got to know a little bit about everything, or at least be interested, because that's where you're going to go like, ooh, you know what? This story reminds me of that painting or that time I went to Italy. Something, all of a sudden you're making connections. And if you're not interested in other things, then you're not going to have those dots. You're not going to have those, they're not going to be available to you. I wanted people who were both interesting and interested. Those tend to be the same person. It's hard to be an interesting person when you're not interested in other things. In my business now as a keynote speaker, I run into a lot of experts. I'm an expert on leadership. I'm an expert on sales, expert on this. And a lot of them, that's all they read about. Those are the only people they talk to. That's all. And so they've got a great depth of knowledge, but you ask them about any other thing, that's all they can talk about. I'm sure you know people like that also.
Yeah.
they're kind of boring. I mean, unless you also are interested in that particular thing, it's kind of boring because, like, oh, that's, we all know people who every time we're with them, it's like, oh my goodness, that's all they can talk about. I mean, how do you get to be a great conversationalist? By being interested in the other person and asking them. One of my kind of benchmarks that I always try to go for is to know enough about pretty much everything so that I can ask a question that would interest an expert. So I don't have to be the expert in everything, but I want to know something so that I can ask, oh, you're a graduate student in Russian history? I read a book about Nicholas II once, and I don't remember much about it, but I remember thinking that he was a really good husband, but a really bad czar. Well, yeah, actually, that is interesting. It's interesting. That may be all I know about Russian history, but at least it's something, that's great. A lot of people watching this are younger people who are starting their careers. So and we talked about this earlier about going in for a job interview. What if on the interviewer's desk you see a book about, I don't know, Australian history, or a book about sailing, or a book about any topic? Wouldn't it be cool if you could ask, hey, one thing I always wondered, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden the interviewer is thinking, even though you're not talking about the job at all, the interviewer is thinking, this is an interesting person. Smart people like to be around other smart, interesting people. So the best way to be interesting is to be interested in a broad variety of things, no matter what your specialty is. And yes, whatever you specialize in, you need to know that. I mean, that's where you need to be an expert. But then read other things. Read articles and blogs that you wouldn't normally read. Listen to podcasts that you wouldn't normally listen to. Talk to people that you wouldn't normally talk to. And you're going to build up a library of dots that you can connect at any given time. So that's what I look for in comedy writers as well. Because, one, they were more fun to be around. And two, they came up with more creative ideas because they had more raw materials. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's such valuable advice. And I guess that goes off what you said at the beginning as well about your interns and offering them the opportunity to take up different jobs. And if,
right.
That's so valuable in being able to learn other areas, even if it's not something that you necessarily want to pursue, just having that knowledge.
Exactly. Just having a few things in your back pocket that you can pull out if the situation warrants it. Again, that sets you apart from everybody else.
Yeah. So did you ever have any examples when you were working on Almost Live where perhaps your writers had different perspectives, but it ultimately worked out in the end and really paid off?
Yeah, you say different perspectives. I'll just call them fights. That did happen because when it comes to, comedy is subjective, of course. And what's funny to one person isn't funny to another person. Sometimes within one piece, like in the editing room, a lot of times there would be, and it would get fairly aggressive at times, not physically aggressive, about, should we take this shot, or this take or this take? Should we dissolve or do a hard cut? And if so, at what point do we do this? And I always encourage that, and here's why. Because, up to a point. If it started getting too personal or something like that, then, you have to step in. But what I loved was the reason they're arguing is because they're invested in the outcome. And I would rather have a team that's invested in the outcome than a team that's just, fine, do whatever you want, I don't care. I'd rather have that creative friction. Plus the fact that creativity comes from conflict. Without conflict, there's no creativity. Without conflict, there's no humor. And again, these were smart people and with healthy egos because, look, it's television. Plus, I told you I'd force them to be on camera, but once you're on camera and you start to get recognized, that's kind of a nice ego boost. When you walk around town and be like, oh, look, it's so-and-so. It's kind of a cool little ego boost. But it worked for the good of the show. I was going to say 9 times out of 10. Let's say 8 times out of 10. In 15 years, not everything worked out the way that we wanted it to. Earlier, I talked about things like, a sketch wasn't coming together or a guest canceled at the last minute. There was one time, and then the question is, how do you recover? On Saturday night, that studio audience is going to be there, and you can't just come out and say, sorry, guest canceled, no show tonight. You've got to do something. So one Saturday, we were really excited because we'd gotten a big name to be our guest, which didn't always happen. Because especially in the early days of Almost Live, Seattle was not a big deal yet. Getting celebrities to come to Seattle was tough. Most of the time we had to deal with people who were already here. But on this day, we were really, really pumped because we got a big name to be our guest. We got Johnny Depp. Now, this is before he was a movie star, but he was a TV star. He was in a series called 21 Jump Street. And we're in Seattle, Washington. They were shooting in Vancouver, BC, British Columbia, which is only a few hours north of us. So I thought that could work out. So I gave him a call, and turned out he knew the show. So great, we're going to get him. January 10th, 1987. That's when it was. January 10th,
Oh, wow.
1987. Burned into my memory. Because, so we come to work that day, that Saturday, and it's going to be great. It's like, happy dance time, because we got Johnny Depp. It's going to be so cool. Until late in the morning, I get a phone call, and it's Johnny Depp. And he says, Bill, I'm really, really sorry, but I have to cancel. They scheduled reshoots for Jump Street. I can't get out of it. I have to, I'm not going to be able to make it. Well, that's a bummer, because he was our main guest. I was going to have him on for 2 segments. That's 2 segments of the show. That's a substantial block of time. And now we're in a panic. You've been there, right? I'm sure you have. I'm sure everybody watching this has been in one of those situations where, like, you think you've done everything right, and you have. You've done all your homework. You've planned everything out, and then something happens, and the universe pulls the rug out from under you. Maybe you get a flat tire on the way to the job interview. Maybe there's a global pandemic that shuts down the entire world. But something happens. Well, so that happened to us. We're in a panic. I call an emergency meeting. We try and come up with a guest for tonight's show. It's got to be somebody local, because it's tonight's show. So we're, what about one of the Seahawks? We had the Seattle Seahawks at that time. We actually still have them. No, they're out of town. Ugh. How about that cute new anchor at Como TV? No, she's in rehab. But we go on, and for some reason, just nothing's working out. And meanwhile, the clock is like, tick, 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 tick. It's getting closer and closer to showtime. It's like, what are we going to do? When all of a sudden, one of my writers, in fact, it was my lowest paid writer, pops his head up and he says, I might be able to do something with liquid nitrogen, which was not helpful. Like, we're looking for a guest to interview. Here's a tip. You cannot interview liquid nitrogen. And like I said, he was the lowest paid writer, so he just kind of like, shut up, Bill. His name was Bill also. Shut up. The grown-ups are trying to solve a problem. But then the clock, tick, 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 it's getting closer and closer, and we're not coming up with anybody. So finally, it's like, oh, all right, Bill, tell us about your stupid liquid nitrogen idea. And that's when he started painting a picture for us. He said, no, this could work out. Liquid nitrogen. It's very cold. You take a marshmallow, big old marshmallow, throw it in the liquid nitrogen. I take a pair of tongs, pull the marshmallow out, pop it in my mouth, bite down. Smoke pours out of my nose and mouth. Cool, right?
Yeah.
So we thought, this just might work. And that night, just a few hours later, my lowest paid writer, Bill, whose full name was Bill Nye, became Bill Nye the Science Guy. All because a guest dropped out. And it was just going to be a one-time deal, but it was so good. And most people never saw Bill Nye at his best, because his best was always the rehearsal in the afternoon. Because that's when we would do everything for the first time, and sometimes the experiments would work, sometimes they wouldn't work, but the ad-libs were great. But so the studio audience never got to see the very best, but still what they saw was pretty darn good. Ever since then, though, I mean, obviously I've had things go wrong in my life. We all had. We all have. I mean, 2020, again, with this global pandemic, what do we do? For example, I mentioned I'm now a keynote speaker. My entire business was getting on airplanes and flying someplace and speaking to large enclosed groups of people. Well, that stopped being a thing. But, I've been through this before. I had Johnny Depp cancel out on me, and, we came up with something. You start to feel somewhat bulletproof. Once you've been through enough battles and made it through, it's not that it doesn't bother you. It's not that you don't feel that pressure, but you start to feel somewhat bulletproof. And it also taught me, again, that just because somebody is the lowest ranking person, it doesn't matter where the good ideas come from. There were any number of times over those 15 years that the best thing on the show that night was something that an intern had pitched or had even written. It happened. It's like, and it would be very easy to say, no, you don't get to write sketches. You're just an intern. I don't care where the great idea comes from. I don't care. I've got a healthy ego, but not so much that I'm going to sabotage my show, whatever that show is, whether it's my TV show or my career or whatever, because the great idea comes from somebody other than me. So, to some extent, I invented Bill Nye the Science Guy.
I love that story. It gave me chills hearing it. And I guess that's a great reminder as well that for us who are just entering the workforce, don't be afraid to speak up and share your ideas because they're valuable as well.
They are valuable. Hopefully they will be of that mindset that, hey, a good idea can come from anybody. That's not always the case, unfortunately. But I'd rather be seen as somebody who has ideas than somebody who's just, wallpaper.
Yeah. And you spoke about the pressure of things going wrong and trying to resolve that. Mm-hmm. So in the event of potentially starting your career journey and feeling like you're on the wrong path or that you don't know what you want to do, what's your advice in navigating that? I feel like for myself this year, I felt really lost at work and like I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing, or that my passions don't necessarily align. So yeah, what's your advice on navigating that for people like me or people in similar situations?
I mean, the big thing to remember is it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to go down one path and then realize that, oh, maybe this isn't the thing. It was a little different when I was starting out, although the principle still holds, where you think, oh my goodness, if I get this wrong, my life is over. What if I major in this in college and it turns out I don't really like it? What if I take this job and it turns out I'm not really any good at it? Well, then you've learned something. You don't have to get it right the first time or the second time or the third time. Now, at some point, hopefully you will. But again, each path you go down, whether it ends up being the long-term, right fit or not, it's a collection of dots. Again, we talked about, connecting dots. You're building up experience in one thing or another. You're building up a bank of knowledge. It's amazing how I find that when I'm talking to audiences or if I'm talking to a coaching or a consulting client, I'll pull things out from like my job when I was a paper boy or a course I took in college in anthropology. There's nothing I do in my career that has anything to do with anthropology. But I took that course and those dots are floating around up here. They're available. It's probably at least 2 or 3 times a year I'll pull, there'll be something that somebody will say. I'll go like, here's something I learned in an anthropology course, blah, blah, blah. And, all those things that we feel are the wrong path or a wrong turn, they're generally not fatal. And they're a knowledge bank of other experiences that you can and will draw from, as long as you look at them that way. And I know it's tough because when you're young, you don't have the perspective of perspective. You can't look back. So it really is unfair. It's only when you get old that you can look back and go, oh, you know what? Everything actually came together. But things do have a way of coming together as long as you've got that attitude that I'm here to learn. That's really what this whole journey is about. To learn, to live, to love, to matter. That's really what the whole thing's about. As long as you keep that in mind, it's not about making money. Yes, making money is important because it's just like, air. Yeah, yes, you need air to survive. You need money to survive, that sort of thing. But it's more about, am I going to keep learning? Am I going to take something from every experience I have and think, okay, how can I use this? Or like, I'm going to store this as a good experience. It's almost like the way an actor goes through life. They see everything. It's like, oh, I've got to remember this because I might have to play this role at some point. It's kind of similar to that. So I guess that's my advice. It's a mindset, and it's okay to take some wrong turns or some detours every now and then. I'm tempted to throw a disclaimer in there about, well, on the other hand, you don't want to throw your entire life away, but who's to say what a thrown away life is? To one person, it's like, I won't be successful unless I, can surpass Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates in net worth. And for somebody else, it's like, if I have a partner who loves me and I love them, and we go through life having adventures, whether those adventures are expensive or just, then that's great. There's no right or wrong answer. being a serial killer might be a wrong answer, but short of things like that.
No, I think that's a great reminder that everything in the end works out, hopefully. And so long as you have the right intentions and that you want to learn and you're expanding your knowledge, that's all.
And don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for connections. One thing I have found is that success in life, a lot of it is about connections, which can be tough. I mean, I'm an introvert. I'm very much an introvert, which is weird because I make my living being in front of a lot of people. So it's hard for me to start conversations with people. In my TED Talk, I have a story about that as well. You never know who, when you get down the line, say, oh, I'd like to try this. And then the magic thing is, okay, who do I know who? Or who do I know who knows somebody who? I want to be a stockbroker. Okay, who do I know who can, tell me something about that? That's really a magic phrase to keep in mind. Who do I know who? And then pick up a phone, send a text, send an email saying, hey, I want to learn more about blah, blah, blah. Would you be open to a 15-minute chat? Nobody's going to say no to that because it's flattering. You think, wow, they think I might have something to offer. Yeah, of almost anybody's going to say yes to that. And now you've made a connection. And if you can show during that 15-minute chat that you're interested in them, which means that you don't do most of the talking, you ask a couple of good questions that they'll find interesting, and you do that, you figure that out by doing your homework, your research, which is easier now than ever, of course, and you're going to be somebody that they'll remember. Now, maybe you're looking for a job from them down the line, maybe you're not, but either way, now you've got access to them. They're going to remember, oh yeah, that was an interesting person. And the next time you call or text or something, they're going to pay attention. And
with the internet now, it makes it easier than ever to reach out to practically anyone.
Yeah, it really does.
You are now, as you've mentioned, you're a keynote speaker. And you recently, a few years ago, did a TED Talk, which is how I found you. And I loved your TED Talk. After I watched it, I came home to my family and I was trying to explain the connect the dots philosophy that you were talking about. And the Russian that you met on the plane.
Oh, right. The opening story. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I loved it. You're so energetic and engaging in your speaking. So if anyone that is watching hasn't seen that, I'll leave that in the description box as well so they can give it a watch. What made you want to shift from working in TV to becoming a keynote speaker?
Well, they canceled the show. So sometimes the decision is made. We were still number one in our time slot, but for a number of corporate reasons, they said, "Okay, you guys no longer work here." And I had just bought a new house and a new car, so okay, time to problem solve, time to do something. So I started thinking about, okay, what can I do? I need to find something. I thought, okay, I can write jokes for like the Tonight Show or something, which I'd done, but that doesn't pay much, and it's I didn't really want to do that. Okay, I know how to be a TV producer, but only for these kind of shows, and there aren't that many of them. I thought, okay, my goodness, what can I do then? And I realized I was defining myself too narrowly. I thought, I'm a joke writer, I'm a TV producer. That's it. And I kind of went around with that for, several weeks, thinking, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I started thinking less about what I had specifically done and started thinking more about, okay, what have I learned? Like, what experience do I have? And I realized that, first of all, I learned a lot about leadership because I was a leader for 15 years. I was the producer. I was the executive producer. I led this team to outstanding results. Overall, all combined, we won over 100 Emmys. 29 of those went to me, but the rest of them went to the rest of the staff, the rest of the team. And like I said, 10 straight years of number one ratings. Those are astounding results. So I thought, well, that's pretty good. I know how to lead a team. Not only that, I know how to lead a creative team, which is kind of a different kind of leadership. Some of the things are the same, but there are specific skills I learned about. How do you lead a creative, innovative team? How do you keep them innovative? How do you create a context where they can come up with the most creative and useful ideas? I also learned how to, what I call, turn creativity into money, which is what innovation is. Because we can come up with all the great comedy ideas in the world and all the great jokes, but if I couldn't turn that into a product that advertisers would buy, we wouldn't have lasted more than a couple of weeks. And I also learned an awful lot about innovation and creativity, which is what I speak on today. as we talked about, we had to create a brand new show every week for 15 years. We had to be innovative every week for 15 years, whether we felt like it or not, no matter what was going on in our personal lives, whether we're going through a divorce or the dog just died or whatever. And, all those things happened to me and other members of my staff. You got to come in, you got to create, you got to be innovative. So how do you do that? How can you be innovative on demand? And I found there's a big market for that in the corporate world because they need to do the exact same thing. They may not need to write jokes or create a TV show, but they need to be, they need to come up with new products and new ways to go to the market and new ways to engage their shareholders and their clientele and that sort of thing, so that they can stand out from the competition. And okay, well, I've got some expertise in that along with some pretty good stories.
That's great. And so then you touched on the fact that creativity and innovation are in fact different.
Yeah.
I guess I always thought they were synonymous with one another. So that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, people do think that. They think, they use them interchangeably. Creativity is one of the ingredients of innovation. Innovation basically is applied creativity. It's taking the creativity and turning it into something of value. It's basically, at its core, it's kind of a three-step process. There's the coming up with the ideas. That's the creativity part. That's the fun part. Then there's the evaluating the ideas. Okay, we have 300 ideas. We can only do one of them. Which one is it? And there are processes and techniques to be able to do, okay, what's the right thing? And then there's the implementation. Okay, now we have our idea. Okay, now what? How do we roll it out? What do we do? How do we make sure that we don't bet the entire company on this one idea? What if it doesn't work? What if, so there's all that. All that is part of innovation. The creativity, which is, again, it's the fun part, and it's hugely important, but it's not the whole thing.
What do you say to people who think that they're not creative? I feel like I've heard that a lot throughout my life where people are like, oh no, I'm not creative. Is creativity something that only select people have? What do you think of that?
Yeah, we all have it. We all have the ability. It can be honed, it can be elevated, but mostly we just have to remember that we have it. Yeah, and there are people who think, well, I'm not one of the creative ones. Part of that's because they don't understand what creativity is. We talked about this a little bit before, and I talked about it in the TEDx talk, that they think that creativity is this lightning bolt and it only strikes the gifted few. Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, people like that. It only strikes those gifted few. And, well, I'm not Steve Jobs or Elon Musk, whatever, so therefore I must not be creative. Well, you don't have to invent the iPhone or the internet or the Tesla in order to be creative. Creativity can, there's large and small innovations, and they're all worthy. So we all have that ability. Again, it's just about connecting dots. Here's what happens in the mind of most people, and then in the mind of an innovative thinker. Most people, we go through life, dum-de-dum-de-dum. We just kind of walk through life, and every now and then, bam, we hit a brick wall of some sort. Again, maybe it's, the flat tire on the way to the important meeting. We run into some kind of an obstacle, and we have what I call the Homer Simpson moment. We hit the brick wall, we go, "Go!" And that's it. And that's where most of us stop. I mean, if we do anything else, we complain about it and we whine about it to our friends and colleagues and coworkers, right? But that's where we stop. We run up against something and we say, "Oh, dope, I don't like this," and then we complain. The innovative thinker goes through that exact same process. She walks through life, dum-de-dum-de-dum, hits a brick wall, has the Homer Simpson moment, dope! But then the innovative thinker does one more thing, just one more thing. They ask the question, how can this be better? That's it. That question leads them on to a different path. How can this be better? That's the start. Because creativity, innovation, it's really all about solving a problem, which is why I find that engineers tend to be really creative. They don't think of themselves as creative, but engineers are problem solvers. They love to take things apart, see how does this work, and give me a problem, I want to solve it. We all have that ability. So the next time you go through life and you hit some kind of a brick wall, which will probably be tomorrow, it might just be, I'm in the shower and every time I reach for I've got soap in my eyes and I reach for the washcloth, it's never where I want it to be. Well, what if I install a hook? What if I get a little suction cup, put a hook up there so the washcloth's always going to be there? Okay, is that the internet? No. Is it the iPhone? No. Is it a Tesla? No. Is it innovative and creative? Yes, it is. Because it's like you've solved a problem. You've gone, you know what, this has been bugging me for 10 years. Let's just do something about it. What can I do? What can I do to fix it? That's creativity. That's innovative. That's innovation. Here's another thing. It's another question. I call it the magic question that'll unlock creativity and innovation. Because again, it's all about connecting dots. Anytime you come across a dot, well, first I'll figure, okay, what's the situation? What's the challenge that I'm trying to solve? I'm trying to find a job, or I'm trying to, whatever the challenge is. Again, as I said before, read an article or a blog that you wouldn't normally read. It's about a subject that you don't care about, okay? But you're just doing it for the purposes of this activity. As you're reading it, or as you're listening to that weird podcast, or as you're having a conversation with somebody you wouldn't normally talk to, ask this question of yourself. How does this relate to my situation? Not does this relate to my situation, because then your brain can just say, no, it doesn't relate, and then, okay, time for lunch. But if you say, how does this relate to my situation? You're forcing your brain to find a connection. Your brain will try and answer any question you put to it. So give it a nice meaty connection, and then force yourself to come up with at least 5 answers. They might all suck. 4 of them might suck. 1 might be brilliant. Or 1 might not be brilliant, but it might be what I call the idea that leads to the idea. Just like I told you in the pitch meetings. Someone would say, well, that's a terrible idea, but there's something in there. What if we look at it like this, and all of a sudden you have a brilliant idea? Well, that brilliant idea would never have happened without the crappy idea that spawned it. So again, you just ask yourself those questions. How, what's the connection between these 2 things? And then sit down with a piece of paper. Get away from the computer. Sit down with an actual piece of paper, and because there's something that happens mentally when you're actually writing something down. There's some synapses that fire, something that make you more creative, and just force yourself to come up with answers. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. Which is why I told you, if during our first 5 years of Almost Live, if something went wrong at the last minute, I was in a panic because I didn't know what to do. In the last 5 years, something went wrong at the last minute. It's like, yeah, that's what I live for because I got this. I can handle this. I will come up with something. That's a great feeling when you think, okay, universe, come on, throw it at me. I got you. It's a great feeling. Okay, here's something. Just take any 2 nouns. Just like open a book and point to any noun. Take 2 of them, and then force yourself to come up with 5 business ideas that combine those 2 nouns in some way, shape, or form. Just doesn't have to be a good business idea, but just come up with 5. Ideally, come up with like 10. But don't just come up with 1 and go like, okay, I'm done, because the first one's going to be the easy one. Once you get to numbers 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that gets tougher. But when you start doing things like that, your brain starts to learn. It's like, oh, okay, we're gonna be a connection machine, are we? Okay, and that puts you ahead of the competition. Here's why: because when it comes to the point where you do need to come up with ideas, maybe you're a part of a team or whatever. The competition, who's facing the same challenges, if you're in the same field, they're facing the same challenges. They're trying to come up with ideas also. Your first 5 ideas and their first 5 ideas are likely to be the same ideas because those are the easy ones. Those are the obvious ones. And that's where they're going to stop. But if you keep going and say, okay, I'm going to come up with 15 more, whether it's just me or my team and we're going to come up with 15 more. Number 12 might be the goal. You never know. One of the things I say over and over in my speeches and everything, you never know which dot is going to lead to the breakthrough. You never know. What if it was going to be number 12? If number 12 was going to be your iPhone, but you stopped at number 5, you lose. It's the person who gets number 12 that wins.
Wow. That's a great way of thinking about it. I've never thought of doing that, connecting the dots. And I mean, you're so right. When you think of the first few ideas, that's the easy route, but taking it that step further.
And we can all do it. And yeah, it's harder at first. Just like when I was writing jokes for The Tonight Show, I would submit 20 jokes every day. And at first, it took me probably an hour and a half to write those 20 jokes. Eventually got to the point where I could almost write 20 jokes in 20 minutes. It was just, wow. I mean, it was just like, how. It's like when you're driving a car, after you've been doing it for a little bit of time, you no longer have to look all over the place for the turn signal. I mean, you know where it is. You know where the brake pedal is. You're not having to think about it. You've got control over your brain, and when your brain realizes that, oh, okay, we're going to be looking for connections from now on, cool, you'll start to see them almost automatically.
And you've shared so many nuggets of wisdom today in regards to young people just entering their careers. But do you have any other advice, or is there a particular moment or story or something that's been really valuable that you've learned over your career that you'd like to share?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a rich, loaded question, Chantal.
Yeah, a bit hard.
Okay, the quote-unquote secrets to success: be a lifelong learner, just for the sake of learning. Become the kind of person who just likes to learn things because it's fun to learn new things. Have new experiences. Some of the things that I've done that I never thought I would really like. I studied ballroom dancing for a couple of years. I'm not a dancer, and again, I'm an introvert. But because somebody I was with wanted to learn, okay, so I studied ballroom dancing. I've gone skydiving on one of my birthdays. I love snakes. I'm not so good with spiders. I thought I want to find a place where I can go hold a tarantula. So I found a place. It was an insect zoo, and they, so held a tarantula. Okay, that's good. Do I use that in my speeches? Nope. Might I someday? Maybe. Maybe it'll come up when I'm talking to a coaching client or a consulting client who's afraid to try something different. Okay, well, I now have that experience. Now, did I do that because, this could build my business if I hold this tarantula? No, not at all. But I have that experience. So read widely. Yes, once you figure out what you want to do, then, learn. Become an expert in that, but learn about all the other things and then take action. So first, become a lifelong learner. Just realize the joy of learning and experiencing new things just for this, not because you're necessarily going to use them, but just for the sake of experiencing something new, whether it turns out to be a good experience or a bad experience. The best stories come from failures, usually. So every time you fail, just think, that's going to be a great story one day. And then don't be afraid to take action, because the universe rewards action. If you're interning for somebody and he says, hey, you've got the keys to the TV station, let me know what you want to learn, take him up on it. You never know where it'll lead.
That's really valuable advice. That's wonderful to hear how open-minded and adventurous you are, though. I'm listening to those stories. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have not lived. But what is your advice for stepping out of your comfort zone then and taking risks and not playing it safe?
I would say start small. I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but if I say, okay, if you're afraid of heights or risk, go skydiving. That might be a bit much to start with. Again, just start by whenever restaurants are opened up again. I don't know, when anybody is watching this. So hopefully when you're watching this, restaurants are opened up again. Maybe they're not. When they're opened up again, go to your favorite restaurant and order something you've never ordered before. You might not like it, but you just might. It'll be something new. Oh, I've never tried oysters. I've never had escargot. I've never had whatever it is. I've never had alligator meat, whatever. Give it a shot. Try those, those kind of low risk stretches. Because here's what happens. When you stretch yourself, even in a small way, you never return exactly to where you were. You've stretched. So now that becomes your baseline. So now you can stretch beyond that, and then that becomes your baseline. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And look, you might not end up being, Richard Branson, who's going to fly into space or something like that. You don't have to do that. But you might be more open to trying new things. Actually, this is a good way to do it. Just make a deal with yourself that over the next month, I'm going to learn a new skill that has nothing to do with my area of interest. I'm just going to learn something. I will not master it, but I'm going to learn how to knit. I'm going to learn how to play 3 chords on the piano. I'm going to whatever. And it's, again, you're telling your brain, your brain's going to go, what's going on here? But you do that enough times, and your brain is going to start to figure out, okay, this is who we are now. And you will become that person.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I really like what you said about expanding and how you just need to compare to who you were, a day ago.
That's exactly what it is, Chantal, compared to who you were. If you're the same person a year from now than you are now, then in my mind, that's a failure. I don't care how much money you've earned. I don't care what kind of job you have. If you're the same person a year from now than you are now, then that's a wasted life. If you're not learning and growing, at least in some way, shape, or form, learning about something, learning about life, learning about people, learning about the world, learning about anything, yeah, you should not be satisfied if that's. There's so many people who, especially once they get a job that they kind of settle into, which doesn't happen that much with younger generations now because, but they just kind of default their life. There are people. I'm sure you know people like this too. I certainly do, who they kind of live their life like a couch potato. Did you know that expression? Do you use that expression? They sit on the couch and just watch TV, and they just kind of watch their life go by, and they're not really even an active participant in it. You're just kind of like, oh, I'll go to work, I'll come home, I'll watch TV. If it's the weekend, I'll have a beer. And that's and they're just spectators in their own life. They're not active participants in their own life. I just think that's that. And again, who am I to judge? Maybe that works for them, but I just think that's. A lifetime is an amazing opportunity, and especially for everybody watching this who's young. Man, you've got this amazing opportunity in front of you, and you get to design it. You don't get to control everything that happens, but you do get to control how you respond to it, how you react to it, what you do with it, what you learn from it. That's all up to you.
Yeah. I think that's a good reminder for me as well, because I feel like you have to know where you are right away, and there's that pressure that you put on yourself, but you have a lifetime to achieve your goals and to learn and everything, so not to have so much pressure on doing things right now.
Yeah. And just a quick internet search will show you story after story after story of people who didn't figure it out until later. We did this, and then we kind of figured it out. Yeah, if you happen to hit it right the first time, good for you. But if you do, you're also missing out. You've picked your lane, which means you're going to miss out on this one and this one and this one, and those might be really rich roads to go down. Maybe not professionally so much, but just really rich roads experientially. So take some of that pressure off yourself to try and get it right the first or the second time.
Yeah. And then I have one last question, because I know I've taken up a lot of your time. I'm conscious of that. But lastly then, what is next for you? Would you ever return to TV and entertainment, or do you want to continue down the route of keynote speaking, or both maybe?
I don't know that I would do television again, because I feel like I've kind of done that, and I don't feel like there's anything out there for me. And look, I'm not the person. I'm an older white guy. I'm not number one on anybody's list anymore, which is fine, and that's the way it should be. That's actually the way it should have been a long time ago. But yeah, what I really like now though is working with people and organizations so that they can then make a difference. It's not so much about me making the difference anymore. It's me, I hate to say motivating, but training, working with others so that they can then. So I'm not that interested in being the leader anymore. I like creating other leaders. I like working with people to help them up their leadership, their innovation, because those two go hand in hand. A great leader tends to be somebody who has an innovative mindset, and that I like. And that happens through keynotes. It happens through online workshops. It happens through virtual trainings. It happens through one-on-one coaching and team consulting, all that kind of thing. It sounds boring as I say it, but it's really cool when you see people go like, okay, this is going to change everything. What you just said. And it might not be even anything that I think of, because the thing is, we never know. Again, like I said, you never know which dot is going to be the breakthrough, is going to lead to the breakthrough. You never know which dot's going to lead to the breakthrough for somebody else either. I'm sure there are people, Chantel, who you've talked to in your life that you may not even remember the conversation, but they're going around saying, I was speaking, and they might not remember your name, but they'll go, this woman told me something once which has stuck with me. And for you wouldn't even remember it. If they come to you and say, oh, you told me that one thing. Did I? That doesn't sound, I don't remember that. No, you did, and it changed my life. You may have already changed dozens of people's lives that you're not even aware of. But it is cool when you get to see it happen.
That sounds very exciting. And I mean, just from an hour of a conversation with you, I've learnt so much. So I can only imagine your courses would be so wonderful. I'm going to have to tell because I'm a graduate at this company, I'm going to have to tell her if she ever needs to organize events, she should get you one because they do a lot of learning seminars.
Well, she could do a lot worse. So, yeah.
No, oh, yeah. No, thank you so much, Bill.
Oh, Chantel, this has been fabulous. And man, you ask really good questions.
Oh, thank you. I'm pretty new to this, so I'm trying to get used to it.
Really? Wow.
Yes.
You're really good at it.
Thank you. Thank you. All your answers were phenomenal, and I'm sure everyone watching can agree that they've just taken so many amazing nuggets of wisdom from you. So thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome, Chantel, anytime.